Are you wondering what property strategies to embark on? Or perhaps you're looking to hear the thoughts and opinions of portfolio landlords and what they think of several popular property strategies right now? Well, this video is made perfect for you. Join me in this video as we detail 5 property strategies, popular property strategies that I do not believe in. They're plastered all over the internet, property gurus talking about them left, right, and center, but I think the majority of them are a complete waste of time. Now, make sure you watch this video all the way through to the very end, because I'll be detailing why I don't believe in each particular strategy. And the last 2 are guaranteed to shock you. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Marco. I'm a portfolio landlord, property investor, developer, and mentor, and I love helping people invest in residential property. And we've had a bit of good news as of late. I've just had a client who's finished a refurb in a property and he's made over 30 grand profit from this particular deal. So well done, Chris. So before we get into the main part of this video, it's really important to be honest. Now, I don't believe in these strategies which I'm about to share with you here today, and I'll tell you why. But there are positives to these particular strategies. It's just that they're not right for me and I don't believe in them. So the first strategy that I would never invest in is investing in social housing schemes. And this is where we are purchasing a property. This property is let out to a social housing provider or some kind of association on a fixed term contract, perhaps for 5 years. And over those 5 years, you are guaranteed a certain level of rent. Now, this may sound phenomenal. It might sound incredible, but I think there are several risks with embarking on this type of property strategy, which I'm about to embark upon. So first of all, there is no such thing as guaranteed rent. So I just want to get that out the way with, even though it's sold as guaranteed rent, ultimately there's no guarantee behind that. So I've seen people being stung by not being paid their rent even though it was guaranteed. So there's no such thing as free guaranteed money in life, and that's one thing to recognize. The second is these types of properties typically can't be purchased with a mortgage. They have to be cash purchases. Now don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with that, but if you're assessing a deal on the cash you've got in the deal in terms of return on capital employed, then actually these deals aren't that great. Yes, they're paying you a very high income, they're high yielding properties, and if that's what you're looking for, great. But if you're looking at the metric that measures your return on capital, there are better deals and better strategies to embark upon. Now, here's the main reason why I don't like this particular strategy. It's because you're missing out on capital growth. These types of properties are not going to appreciate in line with, say, 2 or 3 bed semi-detached type properties in average or good areas. They're just simply not going to increase in line with those types of properties. And the majority of wealth in property is made in capital growth. So if you're opting for this particular strategy, you're basically saying income's very important to me. I want the income now in the short term, and I'm willing to generate that and forgo capital growth in the long term, which is fine if that's what you're looking for, absolutely great. But for me, it's not my cup of tea. It's not my bag. It's not necessarily something I recommend unless you're looking for a pure income play. So don't get sucked in by these really high enticing yields that are 10% plus, because yes, you may get that, but there are downsides. You may get stung by poor capital growth. Now here's the thing, let's talk about exiting this particular strategy. What is the exit? We can obviously hold this property for the years on that lease. Sometimes these are let out for 25 years or something to that effect, in which case great. But actually, what's the exit? How do we exit from this type of deal? Typically speaking, the whole block will be sold to a pension fund, and that pension fund will use that as income. So that's great. If that can happen, great. We may see a slight uplift in our purchase price and we can exit at a suitable price, which is great. And if you're insistent on embarking upon this type of strategy, look for a developer that has a track record of selling out to pension schemes, and that should give you some confidence that they have the connections to make that sale happen. But actually, if that sale never happens and we're stuck with this property, what's it worth? How are we going to realize that value? You may have to sell it to another investor, potentially at a loss, to part with that deal, because these types of properties are not typically mortgageable. Therefore, we are only selling to investors here. We're not selling to owner occupiers. And if any of you have watched my previous videos, you'll know that actually I like to sell to owner occupiers. If I do sell, that's because we maximize our exit, because owner occupiers are normally willing to pay more than investors. So if you're enjoying this video, please do consider hitting that like button. It will promote this video to like-minded people and increase the awareness of the channel. So second of all, this is the second property strategy that I strongly dislike and I see being thrown about left, right, and center, and that's the rent-to-rent strategy. Well, what is this? If you don't know, let me explain very briefly. It's where we rent a property, so we're renting a property from another landlord on a kind of medium to long-term basis. Perhaps we've agreed to rent this property for 5 years and we'll be subletting it to a tenant and we'll be profiting the margin. So let's say we've agreed to take this property on for £1,000 from the landlord and we're renting it at £1,300. We then pocket that difference. Sounds great, right? Now, here's the thing, let me caveat this, and I don't want to seem and come across very negative because I'm not that. If I had limited funds and I was investing in property today, I probably would do rent to rent. I'll be brutally honest, I probably would explore it. I'd put my time, effort and energy into it. But if you have capital, I would not be wasting your time doing rent to rent. There's better ways, more efficient ways and more effective ways for you to be investing your capital than rent to rent schemes. Now, one of the reasons why I'm not too keen on this strategy is because I see people being burnt by this, in the sense that, new people coming to the industry, they'll agree something with a landlord, but actually they won't end up making very much money. Because they're new to the industry, they haven't accurately forecast the cost of running this property. It normally falls to us to pay for the maintenance, and that's really important. And if you don't factor in those maintenance and you're a bit too over optimistic with what you could achieve rental wise, then all of a sudden you could be lumbered managing a property for 5 years that makes you no money. So if you're embarking upon this strategy, make sure there's good margin, sufficient margin to make sure it's worth your time managing this asset for 5 years. Because I can tell you, this strategy takes a lot of effort, energy to make right. Even to get your very first deal, you could be doing substantial outreach, whether that's calls, letters, networking events, just to come across landlords willing to let you have their property for X number of years. So you've got to have the time and energy and sometimes cost required to make that happen and to market yourself and to make sure you're generating these types of deals. And this is where most people who embark on the rent-to-rent strategy fail. They simply cannot generate the leads required to take a property on for however many number of years. And actually, where the people who carry out this strategy very well, they're very good at generating those leads. They're very good at closing deals with landlords and making that win-win happen. So we've got to think, what is the purpose of rent-to-rent? Obviously, the purpose is to make income in the short term. We want to profit from this difference, right? So as the example that I've alluded to, if we can profit £300, great. But actually, we've got to forecast and take into account all the costs to run the property. But what's the exit? What's the ultimate exit? Yes, it's giving us an income, but we don't have any property to appreciate any gains on over time. We can't benefit from capital appreciation. The landlord still benefits from capital appreciation, and we want to try and benefit from capital appreciation. That's why I believe there are other better strategies, even if you have limited funds, to be embarking upon, because you can get some of that capital appreciation. Whereas in rent to rent, we don't get any of it. So would you rather not own a property or own a property? For me, it's the latter, right? And that's why I think there are other more meaningful strategies to embark upon. Are you looking to start or grow a property portfolio this year? Perhaps you're brand new to property, or maybe you have 2 or 3 properties and you're looking to scale to that next level. Well, this video is made perfect for you. It's that time of year again, and I'm looking to work with a handful of individuals to help them succeed in their property investing journey. Consider working with me. I can help share details of how I buy and negotiate properties. Not only that, I'm here to give you a second opinion, to hold you accountable and to help you assess and appraise deals. I can share the tips of the trade all the way through when it comes to offering on property, to seeing that very deal complete, and even managing the property itself. So if you're looking to invest in property with confidence, perhaps this service is for you. My goal is for you to be wholly self-sufficient within 12 months of working together, so that you can review, appraise and assess property deals on your own terms in confidence. Now is your chance to book your complimentary initial consultation. We can see if we're the right fit for each other and if I can help you. Now, this is normally a paid for service, so if you're a little late to this video and you're watching it in the following month, I'm afraid there is a charge to it, but all proceeds generated through initial consultations are donated to charity. Now, here's the thing, don't take my word for it. Have a look at my website, read all the reviews from past clients, past mentees, see what they thought of the service and see what results they generated within only 12 months of working together. To date, we've nearly surpassed over £500,000 in discounts obtained to market values. Now, some of my clients are now multi-millionaires, portfolio landlords with an impressive portfolio, and some of those are financially free and can rely off the income generated from their portfolio to live. So allow me to share a little bit about these particular deals. We have Vanessa. Vanessa purchased this 2-bed terrace property in Leeds for £95,000. The market value value, roughly speaking, is between £130,000 and £140,000, certainly more on the higher end nowadays. Now we have Matt. Matt purchased a 3-bed terrace property in a good location for £100,000. It's worth at least somewhere between £145,000 and £155,000, a significant discount to the market value. And lastly, we've got Chris. Chris has just finished this renovation, a lovely property, a 2-bed property. Chris bought this for £128,000, put £30,000 into the refurb, and it was valued at £190,000. So a good profit margin in that particular deal. Now, if you're still unsure, I offer a 100% satisfaction guarantee and money back promise. So if you're looking to start a property portfolio this year, or you're looking to grow your existing portfolio, I strongly urge you to book that call with me. The link is in the description, and I very much look forward to seeing you on that very call. All the very best with your property investing. Goodbye. So the third strategy that isn't for me, I'm not a fan of. In fact, this video is turning a bit doom and gloom, isn't it? Perhaps I've got to put a positive spin on it shortly. But let's get back to the video. Third strategy that I'm not too keen on is serviced accommodation. Now, I've had my opinions somewhat swayed a little bit as of late, having come across several friends of mine who are multi-millionaire portfolio landlords who have embarked and are doing serviced accommodation, and it works for them. But I must say, it's hard work. Blimey, it's hard work. I see them out left, right and centre, putting a lot of hours in to make this happen. Yes, the potential income is good, but is it worth all that hassle? If you've already got a multi-million pound portfolio, why are you running about like a legless chicken? So yes, it can be great for income, but once you've got a certain level of income, why do you want to work anymore? And that's why strategy is really important, because once you've achieved your strategy and certainly achieved your minimum income requirement, then there are lots of different strategies that you can embark upon that are more passive. Yes, they may not pay you generously, but if you look at your hourly rate, which I've banged on about on the channel before, your hourly rate will be significantly higher than running about doing serviced accommodation. Again, similar to our previous strategy, rent to rent, if you've got cash, I think there are better strategies to be embarking on than serviced accommodation. And let's remember, there are weighty fees to factor in here. You know, if you're listing on Airbnb, you've got 20% of your revenue gone straight away. If you're instructing an agent to manage your serviced accommodation, you can say goodbye to another 20%. And if you're doing nightly stays, well, every time you get a cleaner, what's that? £100, £200 you've got to think about. So it can be quite costly to run and to maintain this type of strategy. And let's face it, it's a business and you'll be putting a lot of time, effort and energy into it. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. If you want a business, fine, but most investors in property don't want a business. They want a somewhat passive way of making an income and making money. Okay, so we're going to come on to the two slightly shocking ones now, I suppose. And the fourth strategy that is no longer for me, and it's where I made quite a lot of my money to begin with, is the HMO strategy, the houses of multiple occupation strategy, where 3 or more people come together and live in the same dwelling. So this is often best portrayed as maybe 4 or 5 students coming together for that academic year, living in the same home, or maybe say 4 or 5 young professionals all within the same property. They each have their own room. There are lots of different ways of structuring a HMO. Now, I have a lot of experience in HMO, and again, it was very kind to me in my early days, but times have changed. Now, with Article 4, which is a law that prevents you from turning a normal property, a C3 residential dwelling, to a C4 house of multiple occupation, with Article 4 stops you from making that transition without planning permission. So because in most areas where we want to be doing this to generate that value, we can't do that now because of Article 4, it kind of puts a stop to that particular strategy. But that being said, you could still buy existing HMOs that have the permission to be run as HMOs, but you're not going to be realizing any significant value there because the value has already been generated by the prior investor who turned that property from a normal dwelling to a house of multiple occupation. The rents increased drastically by doing so and therefore increasing the value. So that's a little bit harder to do nowadays. Now, don't get me wrong, there are still some locations in the UK where Article 4 is not into effect, so you can legally do this through using permitted development rights. But in most places where you want to be doing this, there is Article 4 in place to stop you from doing this, to curb the uncontrolled growth in HMO properties. So why else am I no longer a fan of the HMO strategy? Well, it just costs a lot more to run a HMO now than what it did when I was in the market. You know, 10 years ago, utility bills were a lot less, the cost to re-let property were a lot less, everything to manage and maintain that property was far less. And there's only so much you can pass on to the tenants. You can't pass everything on to the tenants because it's just not feasible and it's just not going to work for them. So I don't believe that HMOs are as profitable as they once were. Furthermore, with rates being what they are now, it puts a further squeeze on profit margins. And let's face it, HMO mortgage products are normally a little bit more expensive than typical buy-to-let property. So you will pay a premium for getting finance finance on a HMO property. So when you add all these costs together, these increased costs and the fact that it's more trickier to generate value, it just makes the strategy seem a little bit less appealing. Now, it was great for me when I started. It gave me a very good income. HMOs are geared towards income rather than capital growth. So it was great. It really helped me. And I probably couldn't be here now without my HMOs. But again, once we hit a certain income, once we've achieved what we want to achieve, we can transition away to more passive strategies that require less of our time, effort, and energy. Now, I managed all of my HMOs that were local to me, and it takes a lot of time to do so. You know, check-ins, check-outs, inspections, all that kind of stuff takes a lot of time. And in fact, you know, you could say it takes, for one HMO where you've got 4 people living together, it could take 5 times as much work than a single buy-to-let over here that we can let and forget about. And if you're not managing that HMO yourself, which is fine, you have to pay for it. So an agent will charge you for that privilege. And again, the fees to manage a HMO are more expensive than a buy-to-let property. You know, you're probably looking at least 15% management fees to manage a HMO from a good, reputable HMO agent. So we're going to come on to the 5th and the last strategy, and I think I may cause some upset here, but we'll see what happens. And that is commercial property. And again, as you've probably alluded to for people watching my channel, you can see I'm very pro-residential, so please do recognise that bias. I am biased towards residential property, but only because it's been so profitable for me. And I've seen so many people burnt in commercial property. Since COVID, commercial property was kind of the buzz. Boris Johnson made planning laws a lot more favourable, and through permitted developments, commercial conversions could be done fairly easily. But I've seen so many investors being burnt by commercial property. So although I've been involved heavily in commercial property, I've been involved in the letting, the managing and the development of various large commercial properties, I've never put my own money into commercial property. And I think that speaks volumes, really. I don't believe in the strategy in the sense that a business can be wherever it wants to be most of the time. You know, obviously if it's a physical shop like a Tesco or a co-op, that's great. They're the tenants that we want because they have to have a physical premises. But if you're, you know, appealing to SMEs, and when I mean SMEs, really small SMEs, you know, turnover less than 5 million, you know, where they've got several employees working in a particular office, well, they don't have to be there. They can be anywhere. They could work from home if they really wanted to. They don't need your office. They don't need my office. So that's why I'm not a huge fan of that particular niche in the commercial area. I'm conscious there are lots of different types of commercial property, but that seems to be one of the most common ones that's undertaken by investors. So let's transition to that. And why don't I like that? Well, I much prefer the residential side. Every human being needs a roof over their head. They need a property to live in. They need a property to rent or own or whatever the case. And that's why I'm so passionate and a big believer in residential property. If someone is given a choice between paying their rent or paying the rent for their business, they're going to be paying the rent at the home they live in before that's the last bill they're going to stop paying. And that's why I like investing in residential, because this bill over here, your rent for your commercial premises, that can go quite quickly if times are tough. Now, similar to a previous point I mentioned in the HMO strategy, commercial rates are higher. Now, they're much higher than HMO rates. Commercial has its own different niche, and you know, commercial rates are easily a couple of percentage points in excess of buy-to-let. So at the moment, it's quite expensive to get lending on commercial property. It's also, by its nature, seen as a more riskier type property, hence the higher interest rate applicable. Now, loan-to-values are lower on commercial property, so that's the amount of money we can borrow as in comparison to the purchase price, normally up to about 70%. So we can't borrow as, which means our return on capital is a little bit harder to find comparable deals. It's a bit easier in residential to get greater return on capital. So I'm conscious of being very anti-commercial, but of course it works. People undergo it and they make money from it, and it works, but it's just not for me. It's not something that I want to do. I'm very much geared towards residential. And as I mentioned, I've seen investors go broke, go bankrupt, having to force to sell their assets through investing in commercial property when they could have taken a residential option that was far less risk but would have paid them the same, if not greater. So for me, it's all about risk versus the reward. I like residential because the risk is low and the reward is high. In commercial, the risk is probably medium. Yes, the reward is potentially high, but I want to widen that margin. I like asymmetric risk. I like risk where it's a low risk, high reward. I invest in those types of assets of that nature. So following on from that, how can we find a property strategy that is low risk but high reward? You know, what is it? What's it called, and where do we find it, and where does it exist? Well, it's a particular strategy that I've created and kind of molded together, and I call it the hybrid version of the buy-to-let strategy, where we're buying below market value and we're buying buy-to-let property. So by combining these two elements together, the risk is very low. If we're buying below market value, the risk is low. We've mitigated the risk just by buying it low. We could dispose of that asset at a profit, or at worst, break even. So therefore, the risk is low. But the reward is very high, because if we can realize market value, or even close to market value, even if we sell it at a slight discount, we're still making substantial amounts of money. So let me just share a few examples that my clients and mentees have secured by using this particular strategy. So first of all, we purchased a 2-bed property at £95,000. It's worth between £130,000 and £140,000, certainly on the higher end. In fact, I got a property valued on the nearby street for £145,000, so that's a very conservative valuation. You can see straight there the risk is very little. If my client wanted to dispose of that particular property, she could and make a small profit. The risk is very little, but the reward is so high. The reward there at the higher end of the value is £45,000 profit. Unbelievable. Another example here is a 3-bed terrace property, purchase price £100,000, market value between 145 and 155. Again, what's the risk? The risk is minimal. My client, he could sell this again in the auction, take a nice profit and move on, but no, he's keeping it. He's mortgaged the property and he's adding that to portfolio, and he believes in this property long term, which I do too. So again, the reward is very high. And lastly, here's the deal that I recently completed on a flat in Leeds city centre. I bought it at a killer price, £85,000. Next door sold for £132,000 just a few months prior. You can do the math. What's the risk there? Very low risk. I could sell that quite easily to one of my friends or investors at a profit. But no, again, I'm keeping this. It's long term. It's paying me generously in the short term. It has a large potential for reward in the future, but again, the reward is high now. Even if I was to cash out now and sell it at 5 or even a 10% discount, I'd be happy with that reward. So I hope that hybrid version of the buy-to-let strategy, where we're buying below market value and we're buying buy-to-let property, resonates with you. And if it does resonate with you and it's something you're looking to explore, please do book a call with me. The link is in the description. So let's summarize. Well, we've talked about 5 property strategies that I would not embark upon. They're just not for me in no particular order. We've talked about social housing schemes. We've talked about rent to rent, serviced accommodation, HMOs and commercial property. Now, are there any properties that you despise or you don't like, or perhaps they're not for you? Please do comment below. I'm genuinely interested to hear what those strategies are. And do you have a question? Well, if you do, please post below and I will respond to all very nice questions and comments personally. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I wish you all the very best with your property investing journey. Goodbye.